They burned our diplomats alive on galactic television. They thought it would break us. Instead, it forged a new kind of war. One fought not with fleets, but with memory, patience, and precision. This is how humanity answered cruelty with calculated, terrifying consequence. Helen, Carter, and Daniel carried no sidearms when they approached the Galactic Council. Instead, they presented two simple items: a sealed container of roasted coffee beans and a sealed vinyl record. The coffee, they explained, was a beverage that fueled human thought and conversation. The record held the sound of a symphony, drawn from a time when Earth believed art could cross any boundary. Their instructions were clear. Humanity's strength was not just in its warships. They were to display its culture, its warmth, its capacity for wakefulness. The alien assembly watched without expression. Their chrome and crystal chamber felt cold, lit by a pale blue glow that seemed to absorb sound. The council members dipped their heads in what might have been respect. But their eyes, where eyes existed, did not change. They handled the coffee tin with gloved appendages, turning it slowly as though examining a specimen. One of them touched the record's grooves with something like detached interest. To them, these weren't gifts. They were artifacts, proof of a sentimental, underdeveloped species. The record's sleeve showed a human orchestra mid-performance. The image seemed small against the council's shimmering table, a slab of polished alien mineral that felt more like an altar. Beside the record sat the coffee, its rich aroma lost in the sterile air. Across from the item stood the guards. Their armor was obsidian, formless, reflecting no light. No face, no gesture, just presence. Helen and Daniel stood side by side, their postures straight but not rigid. They still believed in something, not just in peace, but in the idea that some values might translate, that shared appreciation for beauty or craft could be a kind of language. It was a final, sweeping wager on common ground, a kind of faith the galaxy had long outgrown. They could not have known what lesson was actually being prepared. The council's silence wasn't reverence. It was appraisal. They were deciding not whether to accept the offering, but how best to use it. The stage was set. A performance was about to begin, but not the one Earth expected. Helen's hand brushed against Daniel's. A brief, unseen point of contact. Two humans far from home, surrounded by beings who saw poetry as data and fragrance as chemical signifiers. The record sat unplayed. The coffee remained unbrewed. Their meaning went unshared. They were symbols, yes, but symbols mean nothing without a shared code, and the galaxy had no key for something as raw, as honest, as human hope. The payoff. Earth's diplomats brought coffee, representing shared warmth and consciousness, and a vinyl record containing a symphony, meant to demonstrate humanity's artistic and emotional depth. They were chosen not as threats but as invitations, evidence that there was more to our species than destruction. They were an attempt to speak a language beyond power. The ceremony ended without warning. Two obsidian-armored soldiers stepped forward. They did not ask. They did not speak. Their grips clamped down on Helen and Daniel's shoulders. The movement was fluid, practiced. A protocol of force. The council members did not shift in their seats. They watched as the diplomats were pulled from the polished floor. No one raised a hand. No one offered a word. The chamber's blue light seemed to grow colder. The air tightened. A circular section of the floor retracted. A platform rose from below, ringed by thin crystalline rods. The soldiers forced Helen and Daniel onto it. Their posture remained military. No struggle, no plea. Just the silent calculation of a nightmare unfolding in real time. The rods lit from within. A low hum filled the room. Then came the heat. Not an explosion. A slow gathering wave of energy that turned the air above the platform into a shimmering lens. It built from their feet upward. A visible distortion. A rising wall of pure thermal force. Helen looked at Daniel. Not in fear. In recognition. A final human exchange in a place that understood none. Her hand found his. Their fingers locked. A quiet act of defiance. That image would not burn away. It seared itself into the retinas of every human watching back home. A still frame in a storm of fire. The flames did not roar. They consumed. They wrapped around the couple in a silent, efficient embrace. The light reflected in the dark visors of the guards. It flickered across the impassive faces of the council. There was no ceremony here, only demonstration. The broadcast went out live, uncut, unfiltered. Every colony, every outpost, every ship in the Terran network saw it happen. The galactic networks carried it too. For them, it was entertainment, a lesson in power dynamics, a reminder of the natural order. Laughter echoed in alien halls. They saw a primitive ritual, a cleansing, the disposal of sentimental baggage. They missed the entire point. They saw fire as an end, a tool for humiliation. They did not see it as a beginning. They did not understand that some fires do not destroy. They forge. They did not see the shift in human eyes across 1,000 worlds. The silence that followed the transmission was not shock. It was storage, a collective intake of breath that would not be released for a very long time. The payoff. The alien soldiers responded to humanity's gesture of coffee and music with immediate, brutal violence. They used the diplomatic offering as the very instrument of execution, pouring the coffee beans around the diplomat's feet as flammable tinder and using the vinyl records container to funnel the accelerant. The music was never played. Instead, the crackle of the fire and the hiss of melting vinyl became the only sounds in the chamber. They turned symbols of human culture into components of a public death, believing they were demonstrating the superiority of power over art. They thought they were teaching a lesson about the irrelevance of sentiment. They were wrong. On Earth, the broadcast did not break humanity. It forged it. The transmission ended, but the feed lingered in 12 command centers, colony hubs, ship bridges. No one moved to shut it off. They watched the loop, flames, clasped hands, the curl of smoke against alien architecture. No one spoke. They absorbed it, made it part of them. This was not a trauma. It was data, a new piece of the universe's operating system installed in silence. The image of Helen and Daniel burning became a collective memory, but not a wound to weep over. It was a shared point of reference, a calibration. In schools, children did not draw pictures of it. They studied it. They analyzed the council's posture, the guard positions, the thermal technology's emission signature. The emotion was not purged. It was banked, stored, converted. Where the galaxy expected despair, they found a hardened, silent resolve. Their own network showed human reactions. Not riots, not panic, a quiet closing of shutters, a cessation of non-essential comms traffic, a planet-wide drop in power consumption as if everyone had stopped to listen. The mocking laughter from the stars was met not with cries, but with a focus so intense it distorted local sensor readings. They thought they were broadcasting a lesson in weakness. They were broadcasting a recipe for their own obsolescence. This was the origin story, not of a victim, but of a predator learning the rules of the game. Humanity had asked for a seat at the table. They were shown the door, so they stopped asking. They began instead to study the table's structure, its weaknesses, the floor beneath it, the species that built it. The moment crystallized a stark divide between galactic cruelty and human endurance. One side believed in spectacle. The other learned the value of the unseen. The petition for a place among the powers was over. A new petition was being written in silence. It was written in the recoding of navigation algorithms, the recalibration of deep-range sensors, the rewiring of old diplomatic protocols for new purposes. It was written in the eyes of officers who no longer looked to the stars with wonder, but with a cold, measuring patience. The galaxy had shown its hand. It was a hand that held a torch. Humanity's response would not be a hand. It would be a vacuum, a silence that pulled oxygen from the room. The galactic reaction to their own broadcast was one of smug satisfaction. They re-aired it on comedy channels. Panelists discussed the sentimental fragility of mammalian species. They used it as a cultural case study in why certain civilizations failed to ascend. They saw it as closure, a minor diplomatic incident resolved with finality. They did not notice the change in human shipping lanes. They did not note the sudden drop in outgoing communications. They missed the complete absence of protest, of pleading, of any request for explanation. They saw silence and mistook it for submission. They saw a fire go out and did not feel the heat transferring elsewhere, building in a place they had not thought to shield. The payoff. The galaxy reacted to the broadcast with open amusement and scholarly condescension. Major networks ran analysis segments framing the execution as a necessary, cultural realignment for a primitive species. Comedic commentators performed skits mocking human sentimental attachments to heated bean water and scratched plastic. Academic circles published papers on the evolutionary disadvantage of empathy in interstellar politics. Ruling councils added the event to their databases as a successful case study in deterrence through spectacle. They logged it as a closed matter, a lesson delivered and received. Their sensors were not calibrated to detect the kind of quiet that follows a verdict, not a defeat. They measured sound, not silence. They tracked explosions, not the slow, precise tightening of a spring. Colonel Marcus Hale did not arrive with a fleet. He came alone. His transport was small, civilian class. He wore a standard diplomatic uniform, no medals, no visible sidearm. His face showed no anger, no grief, just a calm that felt heavier than threats. He stepped onto the same polished floor where it happened. The air still carried a faint scent of ozone and something else. Something burnt. His first words were not recorded by official channels. But every intelligence service in the sector had a listener planted. They expected a protest, a demand for justice, a declaration of war. He gave them none of that. He looked at the council president. He did not bow. On Earth, he said, "I thank you for your demonstration." His voice was flat, carried no sarcasm, no emotion. It was a statement of fact. The council members shifted. This was not in the script. They had prepared for outrage, for tears, for bargaining. They had no protocol for gratitude. He did not speak of vengeance. He spoke of fire. He described human rituals around flame, how families gathered at night beside open fires to share food, how communities built bonds through that shared heat, how fire was not just destruction. It was a center, a place of storytelling, of planning, of memory. He called it a fundamental teacher. He was reframing their atrocity as a lesson, not a humiliation, not a defeat, a gift of data. His quiet demeanor was a weapon they did not know how to counter. They were armed with fleets and plasma casters. He was armed with cultural memory, with perspective. He stood there, a single human in a room built to intimidate galaxies, and he made them feel unobserved, unmeasured. He was the first piece of a new strategy, a patient one. Earth had chosen him not for his combat record, but for his psychological profile. He was a specialist in asymmetric engagement, in turning an opponent's strength into a liability. His thank you was not submission, it was a receipt, an acknowledgement that the lesson had been delivered and would be studied. The Galactic Council dismissed him as a curiosity. A bureaucrat sent to smooth things over. They missed the calculation in his eyes, the way he noted the positions of the guards, the sight lines in the chamber, the material of the walls. He was not there to negotiate. He was there to audit, to gather, to thank them for the blueprint of their own arrogance. He left the same way he arrived, alone, no escort, no fanfare. The council did not realize they had just met their first true adversary. Not a soldier, a strategist, one who understood that the most dangerous wars are not fought with loud declarations, but with quiet acknowledgments. A man who could look at the ashes of two of his own and see not an end, but a beginning. His thank you was the first move in a game they did not know they were playing. It was the sound of a door closing, not on peace, but on the old way of war. The payoff. Colonel Marcus Hale was the head of Earth's newly formed Strategic Calculus Division, a think tank designed for long-term conflict resolution through psychological and cultural manipulation. He thanked the aliens because he recognized their act not as a simple brutality, but as a profound cultural reveal. By expressing gratitude, he reframed the event from a traumatic loss into an intelligence coup. They had voluntarily demonstrated their values, their methods, and their weaknesses. His thanks was the first step in weaponizing their own cruelty against them, turning a public execution into a masterclass in what not to become. Marcus stood in the debriefing room back on Earth. The walls were blank. No screens, no data streams, just soundproofing. He looked at the team assembled. Analysts, strategists, a few field operatives with quiet eyes. He did not open with a mourning period. He did not call for revenge. He said, "They left behind the kindling." The words hung in the air. No one asked what he meant. They knew this was not a threat. It was an observation of fact. The kindling was not a physical object. It was the act itself. The broadcast. The image of two humans burning, The Galactic Council thought they were disposing of evidence, erasing a problem. They were actually planting a seed. They provided the raw emotional material, the spark. They gave humanity a focal point, a shared memory so precise, so visceral it could be weaponized. They handed over the one thing they could not control, how it would be interpreted, how it would be used. He framed their act of cruelty as the starting point for something they could not control. A fire requires 3 elements: fuel, oxygen, heat. The aliens provided the heat, the spark. Humanity would provide the fuel, their resolve, their patience, their capacity to wait. The oxygen would be the vacuum of space itself, the silence between stars where rumors grow and doubt spreads. He made it clear. This was not a tragedy to be avenged. It was a resource to be managed. The memory of the burning diplomats was the spark. Human resolve was the fuel. It was banked, carefully measured, not spent in outbursts, not wasted on symbolic gestures. It would be released in controlled burns, precise applications of pressure, small, deniable actions that would accumulate. The fire they started would not rage out of control. It would be directed. It would cut specific paths. It would leave specific things standing. It would consume others completely. His recurring line became a quiet mantra in strategy sessions. We are new here and every lesson is valuable. It signaled a long game. It reframed inexperience as advantage. They were not bound by galactic conventions. They were not invested in traditional power structures. They could observe, learn, adapt faster. They could see things the older powers took for granted. They could question assumptions that were centuries old. Every alien move was a lesson. Every brutality was a data point. Every display of arrogance was a vulnerability noted. Earth would learn to use perception and patience as weapons. They would not build bigger ships. They would build better narratives. They would not amass larger fleets. They would cultivate deeper doubts. The goal was not to defeat the galaxy in battle. It was to make the galaxy doubt its own strength, its own unity, its own right to rule. They would turn certainty into question marks. They would make every alliance feel temporary, every victory feel hollow. The subtext was clear in every decision from that day forward. Humanity's greatest power was its ability to endure and to seed doubt. They could outlast. They could outthink. They could make the enemy do the work for them. The kindling was theirs now. They would not let it go to waste. They would let it smolder. They would feed it when necessary. They would let the smoke drift into every council chamber, every ship corridor, every private thought. The fire the aliens started would not be put out. It would be tended. It would be aimed. The payoff. When Marcus said the aliens left behind the kindling, he meant they had provided the essential catalyst for humanity's transformation into a formidable, patient adversary. The brutal execution wasn't an endpoint, it was ignition material. The global trauma, the shared memory, the unbreakable resolve. These became the combustible elements that humanity would carefully manage and direct. The aliens thought they were administering a lesson through fire. Instead, they handed humanity the means to master fire itself. They gave us the spark. We provided the fuel, and we would control the burn. Marcus established a new identity for Earth. They called it the polite monster. It was not a title. It was a posture, a way of moving through galactic spaces without raising alarms. The persona was built around Marcus himself. He became its face, its voice, its quiet, unsettling presence. The galaxy initially underestimated this calm, almost humorous diplomat. They saw a man who made small talk about weather patterns on fringe worlds, who complimented architectural details in council chambers, who sometimes brought small gifts, a translated book of Earth poetry, a case of mineral water from a Terran ice moon. They mistook his demeanor for harmlessness, for a species learning its place. They filed reports describing him as non-threatening and curiously sentimental. Their analyst wrote him off. They joked about humanity's need for approval. Their comedy networks ran sketches depicting him as a lonely ambassador seeking friends. They found it amusing. A harmless curiosity from a backward species. They quieted down when he entered a room. Their laughter didn't stop. It just became more careful, more measured. They began to sense something unsettling beneath the surface. A predator does not roar, it lulls. Marcus never raised his voice. He never made a demand. He asked questions. He listened. He remembered details. He would reference a minor official's birthday 6 months later. He would inquire after the health of a diplomat's pet. This precision felt like kindness. It felt like care. But it was cataloging. It was mapping connections. It was building a web of small personal debts and unspoken understandings. He used calm humor to disarm. At a tense trade negotiation, he once remarked that human and alien digestive systems were not so different after all. The room chuckled nervously. He didn't smile. He just noted the observation and moved on. It was a reminder of shared biology, a subtle leveling of the field. It made them see him as a person, not a representative. It made them forget he was also a weapon. Patience when provoked becomes strategy was the operating principle. It was written into his briefs, taught to his aides. There was no reaction to slights, no response to insults, only a slow, steady accumulation of influence, a quiet repositioning of pieces on a board only he could see. The goal was not to win an argument. It was to win the room, to win the narrative. The line, "Keep your friends close, your enemies closer," emerged in clandestine moments. It was not a piece of advice. It was an operational directive. Marcus made a point of dining with his most vocal opponents. He attended the social functions of species that had voted for the execution of his diplomats. He listened to their concerns. He agreed with their criticisms. He made them feel heard, understood. He thanked them for their honesty. This proximity was not friendship. It was intelligence gathering. It was the careful application of psychological pressure. It was the art of making an enemy feel comfortable enough to reveal their hand. It hinted at a deeper plan to observe, to insinuate doubt, and to prepare leverage. Every conversation was a source of data. Every relaxed moment was an opportunity to plant a seed of uncertainty. A casual question about supply chain stability, a concerned remark about another species' growing military budget. He never accused. He only wondered aloud. He let them connect the dots themselves. He made them doubt their allies, their security, their own judgments. The payoff, the polite monster persona, was a calculated diplomatic strategy where humanity, through Colonel Hale, presented itself as courteous, obliging, and oddly sentimental, all while systematically gathering intelligence, sowing discord, and positioning itself in the heart of galactic power structures. It made the galaxy more nervous than open threats because threats are predictable. They can be met with force. Politeness is a fog. It obscures intent. It denies a clear target. It forces the opponent to constantly question their own perceptions. Is he a fool or a mastermind? Is this kindness or a calculation? The inability to answer those questions was more corrosive than any declaration of war. It turned every interaction into a puzzle, and humanity held the only box with the answers. Earth's counteroffensive began not with a bang but with a whisper. The first sign was a supply convoy on the Kelton route, 3 heavy freighters carrying reactor cores. Their drives did not fail. Their hulls did not breach. Their navigation arrays simply recalculated, told them their destination coordinates were invalid. They drifted for 13 hours until a patrol found them. The cargo was intact. The crews were unharmed. No explanation was found. Ships and supply lines began to fail, not through direct assault. A communications hub on the rim went silent. Not offline, silent. Its transmitters active but sending only a clean carrier wave. A perfect empty signal. Teams found the station fully powered. The staff sat at their posts. The system showed no errors. They just were not communicating anything. It was as if the station had forgotten how to speak. Unexplained malfunctions became routine. A dreadnought's primary weapon system refused to arm during a fleet review. The safety locks engaged for no reason. Diagnostics found nothing. The admiral in charge was quietly reassigned. A fuel refinery on a mining asteroid began producing a contaminated blend. It passed all quality checks. It only failed inside the engines of specific ship classes. The result was not explosions. It was a gradual loss of power. A slow, debilitating loss of trust in their own hardware. Ships vanished without a trace. Not in battle. Not in nebulae. In safe charted lanes. A scout ship on a courier run. A medical frigate transferring staff. They dropped from the network. Their last transmissions were normal, routine, then silence. Search parties found no debris, no energy signatures. just empty space where a ship should have been. It was cleaner than destruction. More final rumors of human fingerprints began to circulate. Not evidence, whispers. A technician on a depot ship claimed to have seen a data spike coinciding with a ship's disappearance. The spike's pattern matched an old Earth encryption algorithm. A freighter captain reported a brief, clean signal from a small vessel, just before his nav systems reset. The vessel's profile was consistent with a Terran deep-range probe. No one could prove anything. The rumors did the work on their own. Marcus refused to claim direct responsibility. When asked by Galactic reporters, he expressed concern. He suggested the incidents were a sign of aging infrastructure. He pointed to budget cuts in the Galactic fleet maintenance programs. He used the word rust more than once. He talked about metal fatigue, software decay. He framed it as a systemic problem, a failure of their own systems, not an attack. Underneath, he orchestrated a tapestry of disruptions that eroded trust in galactic institutions. His teams did not hack systems. They introduced suggestions, a line of code in a maintenance subroutine that would trigger under specific conditions, a corrupted data packet in a navigational update that would misread a single coordinate, a minor calibration error in a fuel mixture algorithm that would compound over time. Each action was small, deniable, insignificant on its own. Together they formed a pattern of instability. His aides noted the growing pattern. They kept a running tally. 3 more supply convoys experienced unexplained delays. 2 more communications hubs required unscheduled resets. The numbers were not large, but they were constant, a drip, a persistent quiet erosion of certainty. It was not the scale that mattered. It was the consistency. This phase hardened Earth's position in the shadows. It turned skepticism into suspicion. It made the galaxy question its own strength, its own technology, its own control over the space it claimed to rule. The enemy was not a fleet. It was a ghost, a glitch, a doubt that settled into the minds of every admiral, every engineer, every pilot. They began to see fragility where they once saw invincibility. They started fearing their own systems more than they feared any enemy. The payoff. Earth began its shadow war through a campaign of systemic sabotage and psychological manipulation, never firing a shot. Special operations units using stealth vessels and remote infiltration tech planted subtle malware in galactic supply chain software, navigational databases, and communications relays. They exploited known vulnerabilities in outdated alien systems, introducing cascading errors that appeared to be routine failures. The goal was never destruction, it was the introduction of doubt. By making the galaxy's own infrastructure seem unreliable, they turned advanced technology into a source of paranoia and eroded confidence in the very institutions that held their power together. Marcus cultivated doubt across rival powers like a farmer sowing a field. He did not plant bombs. He planted questions. His approach treated confusion as a battlefield in itself, a place where victories were not measured in territory taken but in trust eroded. It was a silent, patient form of warfare that required no declarations, no mobilizations, just the careful placement of an idea, a single corrosive thought. He would sit in on interspecies trade negotiations. He would listen for hours. Then he would ask a single question. He might turn to the representative from the Kelton hegemony and say, "I noticed your rival, the Velen, have been purchasing large quantities of hypercoil relays. I heard a rumor they're upgrading their entire fleet's targeting systems. Is that a concern for you?" He delivered it as an innocent observation, a helpful tip, but the seed was planted. The Keltons would then demand answers from the Velen. The Velen would deny it. They would grow suspicious of why the Keltons were asking. The alliance between them, once solid, would develop a hairline fracture. It would not break, not yet. It would just become weaker. His quiet message was always the same. If a species so fragile as mine can cause such chaos without lifting a fleet, what does that say about your galactic strength? He never said it directly. He implied it. He let them reach the conclusion on their own. After a series of unexplained logistical failures, he would express sympathy. He would suggest that such systemic instability was surprising for such an advanced civilization. He framed human-induced chaos as a symptom of a larger galactic sickness, a weakness they all shared. The aim was to fracture coalitions before a formal war ever began. He turned allies into suspects. He made every species look at their neighbor and wonder, were their systems failing due to age? Or due to sabotage from a supposed friend? A trade dispute between the Thrasin Collective and the Rylac Dominion escalated into a military standoff because of a single, corrupted data packet that suggested a breach of treaty. Marcus never claimed responsibility. He only noted how strange it was that their secure networks were so vulnerable. He ensured the galaxy feared Earth's reach even without visible armaments. They began to see human influence everywhere. A power outage on a mining world was not an engineering fault. It was a human test. A communications delay was not solar interference. It was a human listening post. The fear was not of invasion. It was of infiltration. Of an enemy that was already inside, twisting the very systems they relied on. His subtle messaging was captured in a brief, offhand remark to a journalist. Doubt spreads faster than any fleet. It was not a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. He understood that uncertainty is a virus. It does not need ships to travel. It moves through whispers, through glances, through the silent space between official statements. It infects the mind and cripples the will to act collectively. By planting uncertainty, Earth made its future moves rely less on overt violence. They did not need to destroy a battle group if they could make that battle group doubt its orders. They did not need to breach a defense grid if they could make the operators doubt the grid's integrity. The real battlefield was cognitive. It existed in the command centers, the strategy sessions, the quiet moments when an admiral questioned a loyal ally. Marcus weaponized the most powerful force in the universe, not energy, not mass, but a simple, lingering question. A question that once asked can never be fully unanswered. The payoff. Marcus used a multi-pronged strategy of information warfare to fracture alien alliances. His teams anonymously leaked fabricated intelligence reports to rival governments, suggesting betrayals and secret pacts. They subtly manipulated communications to create misunderstandings between allied species, making it appear that treaties were being violated. During diplomatic functions, Marcus would privately express concern to one delegate about another's military expansions or resource grabs, framing it as friendly advice. He used the galaxy's own bureaucratic complexity and mutual distrust against them, turning their greatest strength, their vast interconnected systems, into their primary vulnerability. He made paranoia his primary weapon, ensuring that by the time any formal conflict might begin, the enemy would already be fighting itself. The strategy intensified from sabotage to a declaration. Marcus did not stand before the Galactic Council this time. He sent a tight beam transmission, audio only, to every major command node, every flagship, every ruling seat of power. Its encryption was perfect. Its origin was masked, but its content was unmistakably his. The voice was calm, almost conversational. He opened with a simple statement of fact. You burned 2 of ours alive to amuse yourselves. There was no anger in the tone, no accusation, just a recitation. Tonight you've seen what happens when fire is returned. The tonight he referred to was not a metaphor. 3 hours prior, the primary shipyards of the Kelton hegemony had experienced a cascading power failure. Not an explosion, a systematic shutdown. Every docked vessel from scout ships to dreadnoughts went dark. Life support held. Weapons went offline. Communications died. For exactly 17 minutes, the heart of their fleet was a silent, drifting graveyard. Then power returned. No damage was done. No lives were lost. It was a demonstration. A flex of control. A reminder that their security was an illusion. The narrative pivoted from quiet saboteurs to a chilling equation. The transmission continued. This is not war, the word hung in the air. This is arithmetic. He let the silence stretch. Let them consider the numbers. The 2 diplomats, the millions who served the systems that allowed their murder, the thousands of ships, the hundreds of worlds. You killed 2 of ours, he said, his voice flat and precise. We end 2 million of yours. Violence was reframed as a mathematical inevitability. It was not anger. It was not vengeance. It was a formula, a cold, predictable reaction to a specific action. The proportionality was the point. It was not meant to be fair. It was meant to be terrifying in its logic. It removed emotion from the equation. It made retaliation not a matter of if, but of when and how. The scale was the deterrent. The certainty was the weapon. This induced paranoia about cascading retaliation rather than a straightforward battle. They could not fight a formula. They could not negotiate with a math problem. Every military action now carried a potential price tag. 2 million lives. Which 2 million? Theirs, their allies, civilians, soldiers. The ambiguity was intentional. It forced every commander, every politician to calculate the risk of any aggressive move. It turned their own decision-making process into a battlefield. The fear was no longer of losing a fight. It was of triggering a calculation they could not control. The Galactic Council demanded a response. They received a single data packet. It contained the schematics for the thermal execution platform used to kill the diplomats. Annotated. Every component was listed. Every system analyzed. Beside each entry was a name, a date, a location, the homeworld of the engineer who designed the containment field, the asteroid mine that provided the crystalline rods, the factory world that assembled the control modules. It was not a threat. It was a ledger, a list of contributors to the original fire, a quiet suggestion of where the arithmetic might look next. The payoff. Humanity's response followed the arithmetic through a multi-vector demonstration of precise, scalable force. During the Kelton shipyard blackout, a secondary signal was sent to the Kelton High Command. It contained a list of 2 million names, every citizen residing on their capital world's primary administrative continent. The message stated that had this been a real retaliation, not a warning, those 2 million lives would have been extinguished through targeted atmospheric processing failures and infrastructure collapse. The math was clean. The message was clear. For every human life taken, 1 million of theirs were now on the table. This was not a declaration of war. It was the presentation of a new, horrifyingly logical reality.